When I was a freshman in college, I remember seeing a movie called Barabbas. Anthony Quinn was the star of the movie. All of us old folks might remember Anthony Quinn. But he was the star of the movie Barabbas, and it was a speculation about what happened to Barabbas after Pilate set him free. And it was an interesting movie, and I thought about the movie. I remember as a young guy thinking, wow, if it wasn't for Jesus, Barabbas would have been executed. He was a revolutionary. He was a murderer. He was not a nice guy at all. They would have executed him for sure. But instead, because of Jesus, he went free. And then it struck me, that's my story too. That if it weren't for Jesus, I would have been eternally lost. But because he died for me, just as he died for Barabbas, I have been set free. And the speculation about where this will go in my life is still up for grabs, I suppose. There was in my freshman year of college, I also had a speech for ministers class. It was a homiletics class, how to preach. And my first sermon, I was so taken in by the drama of the trial of Jesus, I wanted to preach on the trial of Jesus. And I remember that quite well because Mrs. Pepperdine came to class. I mean, she's the wife of the founder, George Pepperdine, and she would come to class in those days. I'm sure she just wanted to hear the depth of the wealth of wisdom and knowledge in us 18-year-olds. But she was quite the encouragement. But what really struck me was all the ironies in this trial of Jesus. I mean, we just saw, Jesus is standing before the high priest, the highest of the religious people. He's the high priest. He is the one who goes for the people directly to God, and standing right before him is God, and he doesn't recognize him. I mean, what irony. He thought that Jesus was on trial before him when really the opposite was true. He was on trial before Jesus. And then what we see is the governor of this small piece of dirt on the earth standing before Jesus as his judge. And the irony here, this governor is standing before the king of the universe, thinking that he is judging him when just the opposite is true. And there's such intrigue in this trial of Jesus, so many ironies, so many contrasts. And we're in the midst of this trial of Jesus, this historical narrative. Jesus' trial is taking place just mere hours before his death. These are going to be the last words of Jesus, so it's really important for us to note what takes place here. And so we're going to be in John the 18th chapter, verses 28 through 40 this morning. John 18, 28 through 40. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. And they themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." To fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews?" So they cried out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a robber. There's a temptation that I have is to keep going and complete the entire trial of Jesus today. But there's no point in hurrying through this. It's important that we take a time and take a look at this trial. There's so many contrasts and there's so many ironies. This is the civil portion of Jesus' trial. This is Jesus in front of the Gentiles. John, with the Holy Spirit, is a master writer. We have noticed this before. But one of the literary devices that he uses that is so subtle that we don't really see is the pacing of Pilate. Pacing. He's going back and forth. For instance, he keeps going in and out of the praetorium. The praetorium is where he lives. This is his home. They're out in the courtyard. They don't want to go into the praetorium. And so he comes out to them, it says in verse 29. Therefore, Pilate came out to them. And then in verse 33, he goes into the praetorium again. So he comes out and then he goes in. And then in verse 38, he comes out again. And then in chapter 19, verses 1 through 3, he goes back in. Now we know he went back in because in verse 5 it says, "And he came out again." And verse 4, rather, and then Pilate came out again. And then he comes out again in verse 4, and then he goes in again in verse 9, and then in verse 16, he goes out again. Therefore, when he heard these words, he brought Jesus out. And so he's going in and out, in and out. 7 times he goes in and out. And what this is really showing us is what's going on, the inner workings of Pilate. There is this chaos in his mind. There is this frustration in Pilate, this inner conflicts, this uneasiness. There's something going on with him. He's back and forth. We see the frenzy of his mind. He's not very stable here. And in contrast to this is the hypocrisy of the Jews. The Jews are such hypocrites here. And so in contrast to the hypocrisy of Jesus and the instability of Pilate, we see Jesus. And I think that's what John really wants to see is Jesus. And in the midst of this, he's majestic, he's controlled, he's unshakable. And what I want you to see in this whole thing is this. Shining out of this ugliness is the glory of the Son of God. In all this frenzy and all this chaos and all this hypocrisy, Jesus does not waver. He just stays steady and he stays there where he should be. Sometimes we say as preachers, where the application begins, that's where the sermon begins. And we usually try to apply this to us. And where does this trial apply to us? I'm not sure where this trial exactly applies to us. And that's not going to be my point this morning. I don't know if we need to see an application that applies to us. What we need to see is the glory of Jesus. The beauty of Jesus contrasted here, like John does, between this Jewish crowd and Pilate himself. And so we're introduced to Pilate. We're introduced to Pilate here at the beginning of the text. Pilate comes. They brought Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium. That's where Pilate lives. And they refuse to enter it, it tells us, because they don't want to be defiled. They felt like they'd be defiled if they went into a Gentile's house. They would be ceremonially unclean. Now, you need to realize that there's nowhere in the Old Testament that talks about this. There's nowhere that tells you if you go into a Gentile's house, you'll be ceremonially unclean. This is one of the many things they heaped up on top of the law. Many of the things that Jesus spoke about over and over. This is what they were teaching. This was man's law. This was the tradition that was added. And they would strain the gnat, Jesus said, and swallow the camel. And we see this in their hypocrisy here. They won't enter into the praetorium because they don't want to be defiled. At the same time, they don't mind putting an innocent person to death if he's in their way. I mean, what a contrast, what an irony there. the Passover celebration. They don't want to go because this is the Passover celebration. Remember, the Passover? Passover is a celebration of the remembrance of deliverance of God. And they are determined to put to death God's deliverer, the Savior of the world. What hypocrisy that we see here in these Jewish people. They don't want to be defiled, but they don't mind putting an innocent person to death. They don't want to come into there because they might be defiled. They want to practice. They want to be part of Passover, and yet they're putting to death the very essence of the Passover, God's deliverance of the people. And so then we come to Pilate. Pilate's going to be mentioned here. Pilate comes out to them because they won't come in. He comes out to them. And he asked the important question, what accusation are you bringing against this man? What's the charge? What's the charge that you're going to bring against this guy? And they are incensed. They are offended. If this wasn't an evildoer, when we bring him to you, they still haven't brought a charge. They still haven't brought an accusation. They still haven't brought any testimony. Just trust us, Pilate. This guy deserves to die. Well, take him on your own. Do it yourself. Go and take him and judge him by your own law. But they didn't bring him to be tried. They brought him to be killed. They brought him to be executed. Now, there's a rocky history between Pilate and these Jewish people. When Pilate became governor, he comes in with the Roman soldiers. And the Roman soldiers, you may have seen pictures of this, they are there with their banners and their flags, and they have these battle flags on these poles, and on the top of these poles would be a bust of Caesar. Now, this was offensive to the Jews because to them that was a graven image. That was a graven image of somebody or something, and so they didn't want them to have those types of things in the city of Jerusalem. Now, previous governors, when they came into the city, would take those off the poles, but not Pilate. Pilate's not going to do this. They are going to bow their knee to me. I'm going to show them who is boss, and I don't care if they're offended or not. And that's what he does. He goes into the city with these on. And so the Jews began to demand their removal over and over. They were nuts. They refused to stop. They hounded him for 5 days straight until finally Pilate says, okay, I want all the Jewish leaders to meet me in the amphitheater. So the Jewish leaders come into the amphitheater, and they're immediately surrounded by Roman soldiers. And Pilate says, if you don't stop these complaints, I'm going to execute every one of you. And you know what these Jewish leaders did? They stuck their head out. They stuck their neck out. Go ahead and kill us. You know, they were playing this game of ¿Quién es más macho? You know, who's the toughest here? Who's going to go? And finally, Pilate sees what's going on. He realizes that he's not going to be able to execute them all, so he backs down and he says, okay, I'm not going to do this. Well, then the next thing that happens is that there's a shortage of water in Jerusalem. They need a new aqueduct for Jerusalem, and Pilate gets all the architectural work together to have this aqueduct, but one thing is missing, and that is money. He needs a lot of money. So what does Pilate do? He goes and he robs the temple treasury, takes that money and builds this aqueduct. And he robs that, and so the Jews begin to riot. And the Romans, and that's one thing they're afraid of in these territories, is that people will riot, and they're rioting, and they had to put this riot down, and he beats some of the Jews and kills some others, and so this is tarnishing his popularity, it's tarnishing his reputation, and things aren't going good. And so in order to make himself look better to the emperor, he has these shields made, and he has the name Tiberius written on the shields, and he has them put in the praetorium. Well, this is offensive to the Jews as well. And so they send an emissary to Tiberius and say, look, this guy, he doesn't know what he's doing. We want him out of here. This is terrible what he's doing. And so Tiberius sends word to Pilate, take the shields down. And so there's a tension here between Pilate and these Jewish people. In chapter 19, verse 12, when Pilate made an effort to release Jesus, the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. We have an English word for this. It's the word blackmail. If you don't do what we want, we're going to turn you into the emperor and you are on your last leg. Well, actually, he was on his last leg. Pilate was going to be the governor until about 35 AD, and that's when he's taken out of that position, and soon after, he kills himself. So that's the story of Pilate. So they bring him before Pilate, and he says, well, take him yourself and do with him what you want. And they said, well, we are not allowed to execute anybody. Now, there's again the hypocrisy of these Jewish people. They had no problem at all to take our brother Stephen out and stone him to death. Remember that? They have no problem at all. Give letters to Saul and say, you go out and find these Christians and you put whoever you find in prison or put them to death. They have no problems with this. But they want Jesus executed by the Romans, which is very interesting because John adds this. This is to tell us what kind of death Jesus is going to die. It was to fulfill the prophecy. Back in John, the 12th chapter, verse 32, back in John 12:32, he says, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. See, the Jews threw people down, then they stoned them. The Romans lifted people up, and they crucified them. And so Jesus was indicating what kind of death he would die. He would die by crucifixion. And so to fulfill prophecy, this all had to go through like this, but it's brought on because of the hypocrisy of these Jewish people. And so it's very interesting to see this happening. And so Pilate goes to Jesus and says, are you a king? One of the things that's really difficult is, and this, by the way, is when you're having an email conversation with someone, you notice this, we don't notice the inflection, do we? When you're reading something, you don't know the inflection. You don't know the emotion behind it. Are you the king of the Jews? How is he saying that? Are you the king of the Jews? You got to be kidding me. You're the king of the Jews? Is he saying it that way? Or is he really serious? Are you the king of the Jews? We don't know how he's asking this, whether it's ridicule or if it's seriousness. Are you a king? And Jesus said, well, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, then my people would fight. He does not have an earthly kingdom. And that's what people missed then, and they miss it today. Jesus does not have an earthly kingdom. He's not looking for an earthly kingdom. We are part of this kingdom of God that he has, this heavenly kingdom. He says, no, that's not the way it works at all. And so then in response to this, Pilate says, so you are a king. Well, so you are a king then. And Jesus said, well, you say that correctly, that I'm a king. Through this whole thing, it's amazing to me to see Jesus, how calm and collected he is, how straightforward he is. He's not putting anybody down. He's not hollering, what's wrong with you people? Can't you see I'm innocent? He's not doing any of that. He's just calm and just getting out what the message he wants out. I am a king. So you are a king. You say correctly. And then he says, for this purpose I have been born, and for this purpose I came into the world. Now I want you to notice this. For this I have been born. That's the humanity of Jesus. I have come into the world. That's the deity of Jesus. For this I was born. This is my humanity. For this I have come into the world, my deity. Why did Jesus come? Because he came because he was a king. He was a king. He was the creator. He is going to have a people who worship him. He is the king. So Jesus says, I am a king. You said correctly. This is the reason I came. I came to testify of the truth. I came to testify to the truth. And what does Pilate say there in verse 38? Well, what is truth? A famous phrase, what is truth? Now, here's Pilate's problem. And this is our society's problem today as well. They don't recognize truth. They don't recognize truth. Today's intellectuals will say, well, there is no absolute truth. There's no absolute truth. In America, surveys say that 67% of all Americans believe there is no absolute truth. 67%. Worse than that is 52% of the people who call themselves Christians say there is no absolute truth. Over half those who call themselves Christians say there is no absolute truth. That is the problem that Pilate had. That is the problem that we have today. What's true for me may not be true for you. What's true for you may not be true for me. That's your truth. This is my truth. And so we have this subjective truth back and forth. It might not be true. And this is your truth. This is my truth. So there's no absolute truth. Truth corresponds to reality. What is truth? Truth corresponds to reality. I learned this when I had Logic 101. Logic 101 begins with a very easy premise. It says, the cat is on the mat. And then they ask you the question, is that true or not? You think, well, how in the world would I know? The cat is on the mat. And the answer is this. That is true and only true if the cat is on the mat. That's the truth. The cat is on the mat if he's on the mat. That's truth. Truth is reality. There is a God. That is true and only true if there is a God. Jesus is the Son of God. That's true and only true if there is the Son of God. And we believe that's true. We see the evidence for God. We see the evidence for Jesus. We say this is reality. Jesus believed in absolute truth. He says, that's what I came is to testify to absolute truth. He claimed to be the truth. God is being referred to, the Spirit of God is referred to as the Spirit of truth 3 times in the Gospel of John. Truth is very important to John. 2 Peter 1:3, Peter says that God has given us everything that pertains to life and godliness. We have the truth about life. We have the truth about godliness. He has said it before us. The problem today is that too many people question God. They question Jesus. And it's not for the lack of evidence, but because a lack of desire to live a godly life, to live according to that truth. And so they begin to think, well, maybe there isn't a God. Maybe there isn't a Jesus, because that's what they hope for. That's what they wish for, because we don't want to live a godly life. We don't want to do these things. And this really causes a lot of problem for everybody. In the United States, we have the freedom of religion. You can believe whatever you want. Doesn't make it true, but you have the right to believe it. And, that's a big issue today. If there's a group of religious people who want to call their leader Father, well, no one's going to stop them because they have religious freedom. The problem comes is if they expect everybody else to call them Father. That's where the problem comes, because we have freedom too. And we have the secular religion today that says if a man decides that he's really a woman, or a woman really decides that he's a man, they insist that we do that too. We have to do that too. That's their truth. They say this is their subjective truth, so you have to all be part of that truth. Well, Abraham Lincoln, a long time ago, he asked some people in his office, he said, well, if you call a dog's tail a leg, how many legs does a dog have? And they said, well, 5 then. And he says, no, he has 4. Just because you call a tail a leg doesn't make it so. There are certain truths that doesn't change just because we say it changes. And so we have this freedom to believe whatever we want. We think that because we have the freedom to believe whatever we want, that truth is subjective and we can just have whatever we want. But truth is objective, and that's what Pilate's having problems with. Many non-believers believe today that the culture sets the truth, that the standards of morality are being set by society. Now, if that were true, then we have no right at all to condemn any other culture for the morality that they establish. So if we believe that morality established by the culture is set by society, then we can't complain about any other society setting different standards. So if the Nazis decide they want to kill 6 million Jews, where is it our right to complain about that? That was the morality they established. If they decide they want to kill all the Christians, where are we to complain? Why should we say that? Part of the problem is truth for a lot of people is truth in and it's relative until it affects you. And when it starts affecting you, well, wait, maybe I really need to rethink this again. There's a professor who's teaching in college and teaching about absolute truth. And one of the students was a pretty intellectual guy. He says, I don't see how you can say that there is an absolute truth. How you can say that what you believe is true and what everybody else believes is not true. And they went back and forth with this quite a while. And finally the time came, the final test was done, and the grades went out, and this young guy got his grade. It was an F. And he came back to the professor and said, I can't believe you gave me an F. This is not fair. He says, and the professor said, well, you passed ahead of the class in everything. You aced the test. You did well in everything. But I decided to give you an F. Well, that's not fair. I'm going to go to the dean of students. I'm going to go to the president of the college. I'm going to go to the media. I'm going to start a protest here. This is not fair. And the professor said, well, so you do believe in absolute truth after all, don't you? You know, the relative truth, you know, we like that when we can just do whatever we want. But it comes into conflict with the reality there is an absolute truth. And that's what's happening here, is this concept of truth. And we still have, you know, we still see these things all happening today, don't we? The stuff going on here, I look at the hypocrisy of the Jews, you know, doing this stuff. We still have the hypocrisy today. Our talking heads, those who try to lead us, and they look so intellectual and they look so wise, and they're trying to save the whales and try to save the turtles and trying to save everything. At the same time, they're just going to maintain that we can still, though, kill babies. They want to save the climate. They want to save everything, but we still kill babies. There's that contradiction there. And we see this kind of contradiction in politics and in communities and in society. So to Pilate, when we get back to Pilate, Pilate has the same concept. To Pilate, truth is whatever's pragmatic, whatever works in the here and now, whatever works now. Well, pragmatism works pretty good until it doesn't. Till things really start to fall apart. Life without God's truth leaves us exactly like Pilate, very unstable. We see this instability everywhere because people aren't sure what they can hang their hat on any longer. They're not really sure what's important any longer. They are just in a frenzied mindset, just like Pilate is. And so when we embrace God, we have embraced truth for every situation. That's what Peter says. It's for life and godliness, for everything that pertains to life. We've embraced a truth that should set us straight in every aspect of life. And so he asks, what is truth? And then he goes out and he gives the final verdict. I find him innocent. There's no grounds at all for charges in this case. The verdict, he is not guilty. So here we see Pilate. At times he's sarcastic. At times he's annoyed. At times he seems to be curious. At times he seems to be angry. At times he seems to have these frenzied madness about him. We see all these different emotions of Pilate as we go through this story. And then on the other side, we see the Jews filled with hypocrisy, hatred, self-righteousness. We want this man dead. And in contrast to all this, what I want us to see today is Jesus. Shining out of this ugliness is the glory of the Son of God. He is stable. He is under control. Now, the focus of this story, and this helps us here very well, the focus of the story is not Pilate. The focus of the story is not the Jews. The focus of the story is not us. The focus of the story is Jesus. The focus of Scripture is Jesus. He's the one that we should see as we go through this story is look at Jesus. He's under control. He is truth. We are not searching for truth. Christians feel like we have found the truth. We have found Jesus. He is the truth. He is the King of Kings. We have searched the Scripture and we have found truth. We have found Jesus. We are Christians. We are citizens of his kingdom. He is our king. We are part of his church. He is head. Oh, God is so good. So I hope that in this story of the trial that we can focus on Jesus. Don't get lost. Look at him because he is our king. And look how dignified he is, how majestic he is. In the story, he is the only one who shines. Let's stand and sing together.